Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody. Some 27 years ago, a magazine came out. It was called Information. First edition was published in 1998, 10,000 copies. It was distributed nationally. The second edition came out in 2000, 20,000 editions were printed. I don't know how many were sold. And as it happens, 25 years or 27 years later, the third one has just come out. Its founder and editor-in-chief, as well as the publisher, David Temkin, is the man behind Information, both in its first version and today. So congratulations, David, on the resurrection of Information.
Well, thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
So tell me, it's not a long story, David. Don't make it too long. What is the short story of Information?
Short story is, in the mid-90s, I was working as a software engineer. I was at Apple at that time, and the dot-com boom happened. And suddenly the internet was being promoted as something for everyone, something world transforming. And it looked ready, ripe for both critique and for mockery, because it was absolutely absurd. And that's the track we went down for the first issue and the second issue. And it was written by people who were largely inside of tech, engineers, technologists, designers, and the like. And so it was kind of a view from the inside.
It sounds to me like a kind of anti-Wired, was it? I mean, Wired, you're from San Francisco. You're talking to me from San Francisco right now. Wired, of course, began in the Bay Area. Was it the anti-Wired, or did you imagine it as the anti-Wired?
I think that's safe to say. In fact, when we launched the first issue, when we launched the magazine in the first place, that was the exact headline that was used by the New York Times, the anti-Wired. So had certain things in common. Wired was covering technology from a culture point of view, and so were we. But their angle was a little more, tech is great. Tech will transform the world for the best. Here's some products you can buy, et cetera, et cetera. And we were more like our tagline, everyday computers are making people easier to use.
Yeah, it's a wonderful tagline, which you still have. Do you think you're a bit early? Timing is everything. You don't need me to tell you that. In your day job, you're a previous Google engineer. Now you're at PayPal. Is timing everything? Were you a bit early, David?
I think we were very early with what we were doing, which isn't to say that there wasn't a lot of interest in it, because the internet was emerging then. But it was still kind of like, San Francisco was, the colonies. Tech was sort of a marginal thing. It was a little more of a niche interest. I think now this is the moment, and it's quite a bit later, but there it is.
Well, you always hear that from startup guys like yourself. This is the moment until it isn't. It's always the moment, and then you move on to the next moment. Why did the magazine only last 2 issues originally? I mean, 10,000 and 20,000 copies sound a lot. Were they all sold?
They did very well in terms of what the industry calls sell-through. Way above average sell-through. But this magazine was a labor of love from the start. So it was an all-consuming, I'll call it, extracurricular project for a large number of people, all of whom had day jobs at the time. And, but the first issue probably had like nearly 30 people. The second one had around 30 people. The new issue had 37 people contributing to it, various functions. After the second issue, it had done well, and we had a moment in time where we were like, we want to take this thing forward, turn it into a business, and so on and so forth. And right around then, kind of the cultural moment changed. The dot-com bust was upon us. The thought was that the internet was going to die and that normal people would no longer use it. And that really was what people thought, by the way. And not long after that was 9/11, and people were very focused on entirely different things. And, we kind of went our separate ways, and that's what happened.
I was around back then. I don't actually remember it in those terms. I don't think anyone really believed the internet was done. Maybe some of the dot-com companies were
Maybe
done.
the venture capitalists did, because they told me that directly when I was founding my first startup.
Well, that was always their excuse not to invest, wasn't it?
No, because I ultimately did get investment. They really believed that the internet was going to be a business only tool and that it would not be used by consumers. Without lacking the VC investment, they thought, well, that's over as a consumer medium. Guess that was a mirage.
Yeah, that's not how I remember it, but maybe we have different memories. And actually, you mentioned 2011, 2001, September the 11th. Wasn't that the moment where, quote unquote, the internet or the blogosphere became real, when we suddenly realized that what you call information was essential? Suddenly the bloggers were able to report on what was happening in New York on September 11th much faster than mainstream media.
That's interesting. I do remember actually learning about the attacks on a blog. I remember what the specific blog I was reading. It was super early on. And I do remember, that the heyday of blogs kind of followed that. That's an interesting point.
So what about the physical publication? Even back then in 1998, everyone was going online. Actually, back in 1998, I worked in a physical magazine in San Francisco, a music magazine. And I remember the publisher calling me in and saying, what's this thing called the internet? He was waving a New York Times piece, one of those early pieces on the internet, saying, I want my magazine to be online. Why did you choose, you're a tech guy, David, why did you choose to physically publish the magazine?
Right. So a number of different reasons. I mean, I'll start from the end and work backward here. I remember being interviewed when we launched the publication, and the woman interviewing me, and I'm not exactly sure who it was. She might have been from the Chronicle. She's like, why did you do this? The websites are the whole thing right now. And, you of all people, and et cetera. And I was like, well, would you be talking to me right now if this were a website? And the answer was, well, probably not. And there's something about a physical object where you're really committing to the words that you're publishing. You're creating something that is tangible, and you're creating a different reading experience. A magazine is a curated set of articles and other pieces that, not the same point of view. It's not like a book, but they're all related and they're composed, right? The way we compose when we read media now, we're scrolling, we see a headline, maybe we click through. So it's atomized. We wanted a composed package. We were able to say, these are the things we want to put in one box, and we wanted it to be in people's hands so they kind of feel it, enjoy it, and take the time to read it.
What was your model? You mentioned that you were the anti-Wired, although I'm guessing you had sort of a grudging admiration for, what was it, Metcalf and Rossetti had done. It's quite an achievement at Wired. Did you have models, the New Yorker, maybe music magazines or cultural magazines that you wanted to emulate?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if we were trying to emulate any particular magazine, but the idea of doing a little bit of something that, might in gross terms be called like, it's an underground view or something culty or that kind of thing, and yet presented in such a way that was accessible, was what we wanted to do. Wired had a couple of very interesting things about it. One was that prior to Wired, with a couple of exceptions, magazines about technology, computers, call it what you will, were very much, they were either product magazines, look at this new technology thing you can buy, just really about the tech, this many megahertz and that many, this much RAM and these kinds of things. Or they were almost academic. They were like talking about computer science. Wired made a real stride forward by saying this is sort of a cultural topic. And that's where I think they really hit it on the mark. That, and they took the design seriously. They had like it or not, and a lot of people didn't like it. It was identifiable, unique, differentiated, what they did on the design side.
Yeah, It was, and in some ways, I think it still remains a very good magazine, very compelling, very ideological. The guy who most comes to mind in terms of capturing its ideology is Kevin Kelly. I don't remember exactly. Was he the founding editor? He was certainly there at an early time. And of course, Kelly's cornucopian view of technology became the cornucopian take that Wired became so successful.
I don't know what his position was at Wired, but he was definitely one of the leading voices at the time around that. And it was almost, it was economics, but it was mystical in its own way, his views. They're kind of transformative, this technology.
So what was, not your take, but Information's critique of the Kelly view of the world, this cornucopian, mystical, semi-religious? Stuart Brand, of course, I don't know if he was involved with Wired, but he was certainly part of that crowd. What was your take? That it was a stupid religion, that it was wrong, that it was misguided, or was going to destroy the world?
It's funny. First of all, I don't think we were, explicitly reacting to those sorts of things. That ideology kind of took shape a little bit after we published the first issue. But I think the way it looked from where I was sitting was it was two things you just cited both at once. It was simultaneously laughable and very, very threatening if you took it seriously. So it's like you'd listen to these people and it'd be kind of like, oh, we got this wonderful thing. It's the internet. It's all positive, and it's free. Yahoo! I mean, Yahoo, right? And the people, the young founders of these companies were sort of charming, and they're doing these nice little things, and the idea of thinking of them in the same category as like an Exxon would have been completely absurd. Right? Completely absurd. And so you're like, you have this cute little thing. Isn't that nice? I can, open up my computer and go tell my modem to shriek and give me some pages. And I didn't pay for it. And they're from the other side of the world. And that really is amazing. And by the way, it was amazing. On the other hand, some of the claims they were making were simultaneously laughable. But if you really thought about it, they were, well, that's kind of insidious. Are you for real? And I think, 25 years later, it was kind of gone from early warning signal to, well, this is wholly realized, like 130% realized.
Yeah. And of course, the ideology was we can be rich and have fun and be good all at the same time. It was, you worked at Google. It was the Google premise, and Google more than any other company seemed to be bound up in this of doing no evil.
Yeah. I mean, that whole thing that you're now talking about of as if there's no contradiction between those various attributes. I think that was very much part of the era at that time.
So you recognize this was slightly absurd, or more than slightly absurd, and also more than slightly chilling. You at Information, as the publisher, one of the early editor, recognized this. You published a couple of magazines. The last one in 2000. In the 25 years, again, you don't need me to tell you this, David, a lot's changed. And particularly what's changed, certainly in the last 10 years, is the zeitgeist has dramatically changed. I never get people on my show anymore who have anything good to say about tech. It's very, very rare. Everyone has their own critique of how AI or social media or online news, fake news, is destroying the world. So two questions, maybe dealing with them separately. The first is, what have you made of that? You've been away 25 years. What have you made of this 25 years? And perhaps most importantly, in terms of information, why do we need information? Everybody else is now criticizing the digital revolution.
Yeah. In terms of being away, well, for better or for worse, I've been very present for these 25 years within tech. When you can go look at, the various jobs that I've held at various companies, starting in the 90s with Apple. I founded 3 startups.
Any of them, did you make any money?
That's between me and my God, okay?
So in other words, like you say about your magazine, you did very well.
I did not say any such thing. But I will
did say that about the magazine.
Well, the magazine
in terms of its distribution.
Yeah, the magazine did well. Startups
Very
are
well, not just well.
oh, okay, all right. You want me to,
Wait, no,
back that
those
up?
were your words. Very well.
Okay, then. I hope I'm not offending with that. So you were saying, what's the, these 25 years, what does it look like? What it's it looked like is the promises that were being made, the promises slash threats that were being made when we first started the magazine, were realized, and simultaneously both. The promise was the threat. And we've turned into something where it was not like some marginal, well, everyone's, we got a few people in North America and Europe using the internet for marginal things. It's kind of like we live in a place where there's been a state transition where it used to be we live in the real world, and every so often we would do something called going online. And now we are permanently in the digital world. Everything is mediated through this technology. All of our activities, our way of making sense of the world, the way of perceiving the world.
Even this conversation.
There you go. And it starts to raise the question, like, which is real? Is it the virtual world? Is it what we used to call the real world? It's just really in a different place. And of late, you're looking at kind of another step function change that feels a little bit like it did when the consumer internet first emerged. And that really does pertain to, what you're seeing around AI, but not only around AI, around biotech and things of this form too.
Yeah, and you say information is back, baby. I'm quoting from your website. Why? Because we're at another inflection point. It's not about the quote unquote internet anymore. This tsunami is shaping up to be more radical, deeper, yet served up in a familiar way. So what tsunamis, David, have we had in the past, in the last 20 years? How would you historicize this quarter century, which in Silicon Valley terms is like 500 years or 1,000 years?
Yeah. And that, by the way, is one of the things that this magazine does bring to the table here. There are a number of authors in here who really have a significant perspective and can kind of place things in perspective in a way that you're not going to see in other coverage here. But let's look at that. You mentioned, what are the previous tsunamis with the lesser waves? I would say I can think of a few different moments. One is the creation and popularization of the personal computer, which slightly predates my time even. Next, the emergence and creation of the consumer internet, the World Wide Web, and the rest that came with that, the dot-com boom. Third, the creation of the iPhone specifically, mobile devices. And now we're looking at this kind of AI, biotech, changing what it means to be human, raising the question of what is human. Those are my kind of, signature moments when I look backward.
So you're not at least calling out this, what people call in Silicon Valley, Web 2 or social media. For you, that's just part of the internet.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that social media is part of it, but I would also argue, maybe more to the point, that social media would be nothing like what we now know without the smartphone, and the iPhone is the more salient evolution.
So who are some of your writers? A number of really, I think, quite profound critics of technology have emerged, of digital technology over the last quarter century. Nick Carr comes to mind, Douglas Rushkoff. Who have you got writing in information who are saying original things that haven't been said before?
I think what you're getting here is a pretty different perspective from a kind of outside critic. Most of the people who are writing here are knee deep in the field, first of all, right? So when you look at someone talking about privacy technology, we have an article by John Callis, who is a recognized international expert on privacy technology. He's a cryptography expert. He's been around for quite a while, and he's published and so on and so forth. When you look at, we have another article by somebody named Norm Meyerowitz, who's reflecting on, hey, when I first got involved in computers, well, really there was no personal computer. He was one of the early pioneers of something that became hypertext, and his original work fed into the very definition of what the World Wide Web is. Later, he was a president of Macromedia, and now he is a professor. You're dealing with a kind of a different point of view than, let's say, a outside cultural critic. Whether or not that's something that is different in kind. These are all just different critiques of technology. But I would say, like, one thing you're getting here is this is not, first of all, that we don't have the feel of like an academic journal. It simply isn't like that. There's a lot of satire and humor in this magazine. And, the website is one thing, and we do have a set of articles on the website that you can go and take a look at. Maybe I'll ask you to call one up there, but just to get a flavor of.
Yeah, well, I love the tagline, "Everyday computers are making people easier to use." Was that the original tagline?
Yes, it was. In fact, here, mind if I use some props?
No, although not everyone will be watching, but for those people who aren't watching, David's waving
I'm waving a magazine that is from 1998 that says, just as the current issue does, it says, "Information, everyday computers are making people easier to use."
I mean, I don't want to age shame you, David. You and I are probably a fairly similar age. But are all your contributors of your generation? Do you have younger people?
They're not all of my generation. No, they're not. In fact, some of the editors that joined up are not of this generation either. So we have most of the original team. We have some new additions. We have a completely new design team. And if you were to take a look at the caliber of the design in this, it's remarkable. It's, it's not merely like, hey, that looks professional. It's remarkable. And, that's a credit to Josh Kleinert and the people that he brought in on the design front.
The third edition, coming after 25 years, is got a print run, you said, of 5,000 copies. Where's it going to be distributed? And is there really, I mean, you're self-financing this, so you're taking the risk yourself, but is there really a market for a physical magazine these days? Where do people even buy them? Where do they pick them up?
Well, let's talk about the assumption behind it. The assumption there is that the goal here is to make money in Silicon Valley and have an exit and all that stuff. It's not. The goal here is, this for us was something that we had to say, that we felt the moment was to say it, and that we wanted to put in our own time to say it in the right way. And the goal is to both to get the word out, but, also the satisfaction of actually being able to work on something you believe in. And we did that. And it's a side project in a way that I think tech lacks that right now. And the fact that you kind of immediately asked that question about market share and economics and exit.
No, I didn't. I just was asking how you're going to, I mean, you're not doing this. I understand there's no exit for a magazine. You're not going to make millions of dollars, but you still want to cover your costs.
I am not sure this will cover costs. It depends on sell-through, but these are premium products. It weighs 1.3 pounds. It's 9 by 12 inches. It contains just to add to the retro flavor of it, it contains a flexi disc with a record on it from a band called The Layoffs that you can tear it out and you can play on your record player, should you have such a thing.
But that's suddenly become fashionable. Vinyl is certainly more fashionable in 2025 than it was in 2000. So do you feel you're sort of keying into a new anti-tech, analog kind of nostalgia?
So that's a great question. I think you're definitely onto something with regard to vinyl, right? That's a pretty clear cultural thing. But I also think we're kind of seeing the same thing go on with magazines proper. There are more magazines being published now than there ever have been, at a higher level of fidelity, but they're not, the way you buy them. People are buying them online. They're subscribing to them online. They're discovering them through social media. But that reading experience of paper, people who are younger tend to be getting into that for the same reasons as vinyl or, for example, film photography.
And I'm guessing, David, you and I live in similar part San Francisco. I'm guessing this is the kind of magazine you could pick up at an independent bookstore rather than a Barnes and Noble, even if I don't even know if there is a Barnes and Noble in San Francisco. But it sounds to me like the kind of luxury magazine. I'm guessing a cover price of what, $8 to $10 that you could pick up at an independent bookstore.
The price on this magazine is $19.84.
Wow, $20, like more expensive than a paperback book.
And higher production values and heavier, and it's 160 pages. You need to get a look at this thing.
Well, I hope you send me one for free, given that you come
I'm
on the
very
show.
happy to do that. You'll just, send me your address. I'll get you one or drop one off. Absolutely. Um, yeah, so it is a 1984 is the price, which for a product like this, we took a long look at what magazines are selling for. It's, there are a lot of magazines that are kind of these large, high production value things out there. This is one of them. In terms of where you buy it, yes, we do have it available in a bunch of kind of specialty bookstores, indie bookstores around San Francisco. But you mentioned Barnes and Noble. We just have landed distribution at Barnes and Noble. It will go on sale in early October there, and there are over 600 Barnes and Noble stores in the U.S. and they sell 13% of all magazines sold in the U.S. So that's we're pretty happy to hear that.
Yeah, on the physical side, it's just like vinyl, it's the tactile experience. You've obviously been doing a lot of thinking about this. Do people want to hold things? They want books never really died. CDs did, but then vinyl came back. Magazines then can reappear as long as they're tactile. Maybe that's why Wired never went away, because it was always oddly tactile given its digital ideology.
Yeah, I think you're onto something with that. There are, there used to be magazines that were kind of like just the facts, ma'am, black and white, that kind of thing. I think the reason for, the motivation to have a product like that out in the market is just lesser. You might as well read it on your screen. It's easier to read it on your screen. And yet the more designed magazines that are more visual with, we even have like an 18-page graphic novel in this thing, which reading on your screen would not be a lot of fun. We have a photo essay. You're holding a photo essay that's on, 9 by 12, two facing pieces of paper. It's just not something you can really replicate on a screen. One unfortunate consequence of that is if you're looking at our website, you're like, well, no, yeah, that looks kind of clever. Yeah, I like that article. That sounds interesting. But there's no substitute for actually feeling it in your hand, which is why the actual physical distribution is important. You need to kind of see it in order to really feel the thing.
So I take your point, David, on the tactile nature. That makes it sound quite compelling, but I'm still not convinced actually about the content. I mean, when I asked you who was writing for it, you mentioned someone who'd been a co-founder at Macromedia. Most of our viewers have never even heard of Macromedia. They've always been a footnote, even in the beginning of things. What are you saying in information that's different, that many tech critics now, from Nick Carr, Douglas Rushkoff, Sherry Turkle, haven't already said a million times?
So first off, I can't say that this is even apples to apples with what they're talking about. Okay, you're kind of operating on it's cultural critique. It's a little bit of that, but it's a lot more of, how the tech actually works, how the tech actually evolves. What is it like to work at these companies right now? How weird is this stuff? You have things like, Macromedia. What's interesting about the person from Macromedia is not that he was at Macromedia, is that he was one of the inventors of what we now call hypertext. And he's seen the entire arc of it. And, some guy who's like off the street working at some startup and, just kind of fell off the turnip truck is not going to be able to give you that kind of perspective, nor is a cultural critic from the outside. The other thing, though, that, if I can ask you to go pull up the website, go to the table of contents, and I'll give you an example of how this is not, Douglas Rushkoff. So you hit to the tab on top.
He's going to be very upset. I'm not going to do
I
that.
I like that guy, by the way. I think he's incredibly insightful, but it's different.
Anyway, you can describe it, David. I'm not going to do that.
I think it's a little bit like there is visual humor in this thing. Okay, so we've got like this little piece that's 2 pages, and it's basically saying from tech to bro, and it's a fashion journey. And it's like, let's look at the appearance of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people, all guys, the evolution of what we've come to know and love or not so love of the tech bro. And okay, it starts with like someone from the 70s who was sort of like a scientist working at Intel, and then going into an engineer working at Hewlett Packard, and then going into a program manager, and then going and getting increasingly distant from the tech and more mannered in their presentation and what they're about, and leading up to someone at a, you know, a biotech company. And just, that's the kind of thing you actually need to see it to take away the joke here, but that is not kind of like heavy duty cultural critique.
But it's more like sort of inside Silicon Valley humor. So if you're an engineer at one of these big firms, you'd get it. But what about from people who aren't? Would they get
I think
this?
that's exactly the kind of thing that people who aren't would enjoy. And that being the point, like when you have people who are living this thing day to day, what is it that they can say that would make it actually sensible to someone who is outside of the industry? So it's something written from an inside point of view, but for the outside. There really is a mixture of stuff in here. I mentioned that there's a, you know, an 18-page graphic novel in here, which is written by someone, an artist and a writer, who is, his day job is a UX strategist. And what he's tracing is he's contrasting his upbringing in Calcutta to his new life, you know, living in Silicon Valley and working in Silicon Valley, and the two different ways of life that those are. And it's a great piece of art, and it's also a fascinating kind of cultural commentary that's not like academic cultural commentary, if you know what I'm saying. It's coming in from a creative side. And at the same time, we have articles from people, like current people at recent VP at Google, two different ex-VPs.
Who's the VP at Google?
Two ex-VPs, both of them. One person named Rob Leathern, who is well known in the field of privacy and is kind of a critic of these big tech companies and has worked at them. Another person is Richard Gingras, who used to run Google's news initiative.
Yeah, I know him actually. Is he no longer at Google?
He just left. Yeah.
I spent, he and I were in the Philippines with Maria Ressa a couple of years ago.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So, yeah, he was the guy. Actually, it's interesting. I'm curious why he did he leave or got fired?
No, I mean, he left. He'd been there a very long time. So,
but he was the guy supposed to bridge Google with the publishing industry. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Tough job.
And what are these Google VPs doing? Are they revealing what's really happening? Are they showing why Google's really evil?
So this is all, you know, one of the things that we didn't want to do in this magazine is kind of like, well, you know, let's talk about all the nitty gritty here and now that's going on at this company and whatnot. Most of these things are bigger picture, and not only because this is not, you know, we're not a weekly, we're not a daily, we're not publishing hourly. So
yeah, you're once every 25 years. So your next one will come out in what, 2050?
Well, see, that depends how you count it. Like, it was 2 years after the first issue. So is there one 2 years after this one? Or we don't know what the pattern is, right? You know?
Yeah, that's pattern recognition. Isn't that what's his name called? Pattern recognition.
Pattern recognition. You could recognize the pattern either way. I think, you know, the future will tell. But no, the intent is actually to publish regularly, and we'll see exactly what that means over time. We had an absolute blast doing this, and the reception has been really good so far. So, you know, I think there's a lot of interest in that. We'll see how it all plays out.
You mentioned Douglas Rushkoff. He's an old friend. He was on the show recently talking about how he sees AI as what he called, and I'm quoting him, a native app of the first native app of the internet. He's still cautiously optimistic, although I think his optimism is beginning to fade a bit. What do you make at information about AI? You write about it suggesting that AI, and I'm quoting your website, AI is the silicon-hearted core of this new onslaught, with trillions of dollars being invested in a technology that may yet fall flat. Are guys like Sam Altman, are they just the next version? Are they pretty similar to the original .com utopians, the guys who promised everything and delivered very little?
Well, did they deliver very little? I mean, you got to ask yourself, maybe around the utopia kind of point, but they delivered they transformed society.
Although when it comes to the .com, most of them crashed and lost their businesses, but then of course they came back.
I mean, they, you know, in the long run, they did transform society in the way that, you know, largely what they were talking about. Sam Altman, you know, as an individual, I mean, you know, nothing in particular around him other than to say, it's interesting how when we talk about AI, we're talking about someone like Sam Altman. It's fundamentally a businessman, a marketing guy, in essence, not the inventors of it. And if you rewind to like who founded Google and who were their public faces, they were the actual inventors of the technology. Who founded Apple? They actually built the technology. It's a little indication we're in a different era. AI, it's another one of these things where it's obviously already incredibly useful. It's obviously already delivering things that weren't possible even very recently. It's different in kind. And yet, when you hear the patter out there about things like superintelligence and, we're spinning up nuclear reactors to power this stuff and all this really crazy stuff, you got to wonder, is it more appropriate to laugh at that, or is that something that we all ought to be fearful of because it stands a real chance of happening? And I don't know. But even as it stands, AI is an amazing development in technology. I mean, it truly is.
Last week, we had Jeffrey Hinton on the show, won the Nobel Prize last year, the guy who invented, in some ways, generative AI. Now he's become a great skeptic.
Mm-hmm.
He told me that we have a 15 to 20% chance AI of wiping out the world, which means, as he acknowledged, that he has no idea what will happen. But he spoke also of feminizing the technology. He thought that may be one way to make AI palatable. What's your take on Hinton and AI and the existential questions around AI?
I think the fact that he's kind of sounding, an alarm about it is really interesting. I mean, there's an analog here to be had with the invention of, the atom bomb, right? So whether or not that's a fair analogy, when he talks about something like that, he says 15 to 20% chance of, destroying humanity. That does sort of sound like nuclear weapons. And there have been a lot of people who have talked about this ought to be regulated like nuclear weapons and controlled like nuclear weapons. And yet this, Douglas Rothkopf saying native, application of the internet, whatever that exact phrase means. What's interesting about it is, all right, contrast the emergence of AI with the emergence of nuclear weapons. It couldn't be more different. Like one day of the week, suddenly everyone on the face of the earth can engage with an AI chatbot without paying. How strange is that? I mean, it's just totally different. And yet, maybe there's something in common. Are we playing with fire? Yeah, we're playing with fire. Is it going to catch on fire? Is it going to set the building on fire? Too soon to say.
But if there's a possibility, David, you've spent your life working in these companies. You were with Google, now you're with PayPal. Why are you doing it? I take your point on this publishing passion, something that you're enjoying doing and might be useful. Why don't you do something else?
Why is it that I'm still in the field of technology?
Yeah, if it's equivalent in some ways to nuclear technology, which might destroy the world.
I've never viewed the particular pieces that I'm working on in that manner. Maybe that's kind of being overly generous to myself. But the thing that drew me to the field in the first place was, and remember, this is a long time ago, was that I was a computer science major in college. And I was also a history major. And I also was on the college newspaper. So you can trace a line from those things. But I always felt that computers had a lot to offer for people who were non-technical, and that they would be valuable to people who are non-technical, not just in terms of efficiency or job elimination or making business run faster, but in terms of creativity and doing things that are well outside the scope of, what old mainframe computers were working on. And that was one of the reasons that I was attracted to move to Silicon Valley. It was for a job at Apple in the early 90s. It was working on their first mobile device. And I looked at that and I'm like, wow, this thing could be something really great for normal people. And
as Steve Jobs put it, as he often did, even if he wasn't a particularly pleasant person, he understood what he was doing. He talked about technology being riding a bicycle, or riding the bicycle for the mind, which was a brilliant way of putting it.
I think that was, that hits the nail on the head. And by the way, it's hard to deny that it has delivered a lot of that, along with all the other things that we're kind of complaining about and staring at the eye of and saying, oh my God, how do we get here? But that was part of it. And so if you look at the tagline of this particular magazine, from my point of view, the ideology, if you will, at Apple in the early 90s, certainly in that area, was we want to make computers easier to use in order to make them accessible to normal people. And oh yeah, we're going to get rich off that because we'll have a huge business. But look at this, we're empowering people. It's, Prometheus, it's that kind of thing. And there was something to that. But eventually there was this sense that I had, and that's how that I arrived at that tagline, where the balance of power or agency started shifting. Well, who's being made easier to use? Is it the computers, or is it the humans who we think are using the computers? And, you see that pretty clearly much later. I mean, that took a while to emerge when, the product that I was working on at Apple for 5 years as an engineer, as a software engineer, was something called the Apple Newton. And it was their first mobile device, and you would hold it in your hand and you would write on it with a pen, and it would recognize your handwriting, varying levels of effectiveness, but that's what it did. And these kinds of things, like, they really require that you think about it. And they used to talk about something called computer literacy. You had to learn it. You had to acquire that skill. We want America to be computer literate. Well, what ended up happening was, in terms of ease of use, it became mission accomplished. They really are easy to use. We flipped fully to the other side, where arguably they're addictive. They're so easy to use that they're addictive. So there's no resistance anymore. It's kind of a pull to use it. No one has to be trained, not really, unless you're doing something specialized. So, but my own career trajectory was always about that, okay, this technology is really interesting and offers a lot to people who are non-technical, and I'd like to play a role in trying to make it more useful and more beneficial to people. Has every job I've had, been in that zone? Maybe not. Most of them have. Even my time at Google, when Google was a giant, this was not, early days at Google, when it was sort of Larry and Sergey, and we're going to do this cool thing called search, and everyone thinks we're wonderful, and this wonderful thing. No, by the time I got there, Google brought me in to be responsible for advertising, privacy, and user trust, which sounds like an absolute contradiction in terms. How can you trust this? If you look at the dark heart of big tech, a lot of it is driven by advertising, whether it's the need to have continuous engagement, or the need to have, this kind of the addiction, the data collection, the surveillance. All of this is driven by advertising business model, right? And they brought me into Google, said, look, we're under a fair amount of pressure reputationally and in regulatory terms, and we'd kind of like to clean up our act, and we'd like you to kind of drive the adoption of privacy preserving technology and to increase trust with our users, which is being threatened by all of these practices.
Yeah, and going back to the Newton, of course, it was a big failure, but had Steve Jobs not failed with the Newton, he certainly wouldn't have succeeded with the iPhone. He learned from the Newton to produce something that was completely intuitive. Finally, David, there's an interesting piece by John Thornhill, very smart guy on tech in the FT, today, about Carlota Perez suggesting, and the headline of his piece is "Brace for a Crash Before the Golden Age of AI." He quotes Carlota Perez, who's a very influential tech writer, who says, "You always have to have these crashes to get, if not prosperity, success." Speculate on maybe the next magazine in information will come out in 2050. What's your sense of where? I mean, it's an absurd question, of course, and I wonder, I probably won't be around in 2050. I'm not sure if you will be.
They're going to rewrite our genes and we'll live indefinitely.
Yeah, maybe we'll use all this biotech stuff and follow Ray Kurzweil, take his pills. But whatever, where are we going to be in 2050? Maybe give me two scenarios, one that would be palatable to you and one that you're warning about in information.
Well, okay, let me a shorter time horizon first. I think that writer is onto something, right? Like, so
Who,
all of these,
Carlota Perez or
yeah,
John?
all of these technologies have, like we were talking about the dot-com crash, right? And I kind of skipped right over that. And I said, these technologies from the late 90s wound up effectively taking over the world and transforming society. But before they did that, they crashed and burned. And only if, a few companies emerged from that rubble, having learned something. And then we got to where we are. And the idea that AI will follow a similar trajectory, that makes a ton of sense to me. In terms of negative outcomes, I mean, there are we actually have a little piece on this in the magazine. There are so many different technologically mediated apocalypse scenarios right now that we're looking at. There's so many different ones, of which AI is one, but there are definitely others. We talked about, nuclear weapons, evergreen, that's not going away. Biotech, genetically introduced plagues that you can introduce in your own basement, with tools that are cheap. That's a problem. All of those scenarios do result, the green goose scenario, which I'm sure you've heard about, that kind of thing. The, nuclear devastation, or AI destroying humanity through any number of means. All of those are on the table, which, it's hard not to stare that in the face. Good scenario, it might not be the techno optimist Sam Altman, kind of like booster version of things, but it might be something like, honestly, these tools, they're already kind of useful. And if they can turn into something where we haven't destroyed, half of the jobs on the face of the earth, and we're in a place where they can help people in their daily lives and with creativity, and there are new job opportunities created that are, to compensate for those that are being eliminated, maybe it'll end up well. Maybe AI is okay. Maybe the biotech will be held under control by regulation or by other means that are impossible to envision right now. But that's the good scenario. It's like this, the ceiling on the good scenario is not really that high, is what I would say.
Well, maybe you should, for the fourth issue, which will come out in 2025 of Information, every day people are making computers easier to use. We shall see. Good stuff from David Temkin. He is the editor-in-chief, publisher, general dishwasher at Information Magazine. There are 5,000 of the new copies. They cost $20, well worth it. David, you need to send me one. Best of luck with this. It's an interesting project, an important message. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.